The Chicago Bears need to add more depth at tight end, but Ryan Poles will have a lot more options than just Tyler Warren from Penn State to add another playmaker behind Cole Kmet.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, I want to go through other options for the Chicago Bears at tight end if they don't take Tyler Warren from Penn State with their first-round pick. It's a good tight end class, and it's not like it's Warren or bust to be able to upgrade that spot for the Bears, where there's clearly a need for more tight end help beyond just Cole Kmet. So we'll take a look at some of the tight ends who qualify more as, an inline style of tight end. We'll look at the tight ends that are a little bit more of a flexible receiver option style of tight end that may end up playing the slot a little bit more than more of a true tight end position, and who the best fits for the Bears will be. And I want to do that by looking first at how Ben Johnson's Detroit Lions drafted at tight end, to give us a sense of the types of players they may be looking at that position, so then we can apply that to this year's NFL draft class. Because you might not realize that before Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, the job he held before that, I guess technically he was 1 year as a passing game coordinator, but before that, he spent 2 seasons as the Lions tight ends coach. This is a position he also had in Miami. He was tight ends coach there. So this is, on the offense, this is a spot that he has a lot of hands-on experience working with here, and takes it very seriously what his tight end role will look like in his offense. And so I think the Lions can give us somewhat of a baseline idea of the different types of tight ends Ben Johnson might be looking for that we can then apply to this current Bears team and this year's NFL draft class. So over Ben Johnson's time in Detroit, they drafted 4 tight ends and then had one notable undrafted free agent in there. I know they signed other undrafted free agents, but one that ended up sticking on the team for a while, and we'll get to him in a minute. But I think we all can most recently remember Sam Laporta being the Lions' second-round pick in 2023. He was the 34th overall pick in that draft, very, very early in the second round, by a borderline first-round player that year, and someone who was well-liked in that draft class coming out of Iowa, right? This is a player who had great vertical speed, had a good 40-yard dash at the combine, and a guy who had a lot of yards after catch, someone who could be a playmaker with the ball in their hand. You know that he could work it up and down the seam, and you can have an explosive weapon in the middle of the field. Now part of the drawback for Laporta was that, he wasn't running a robust route tree. It wasn't like crisp routes. This is not somebody who was like separating with great technical ability in terms of his feet and how he's setting defenders up. And he's not a guy who had a lot of tape of making tough, difficult, contested catches. He was a good athlete, a good receiver, good weapon with some blocking upside, maybe not the same blocking as some of the previous Iowa tight ends that had come out and had that reputation, but he wasn't a bad blocker by any means, just not a great blocker in that regard. But speed and yard after catch ability was what made Sam Laporta special, and clearly a lot of what attracted the Detroit Lions into taking him. Just the year before, though, the Lions had used a 5th-round pick on a tight end, James Mitchell out of Virginia Tech, who during his final college season tore his ACL after 2 games. And that's a big reason why he fell to the Lions in the 5th round that year, because he had a big, I think it was his junior season the year before that, but then never had that final year to really put it all together and show the NFL that he could be a consistent playmaker. So that's why he falls. But another one of these players who's great at working vertical up the seam, who can make yards after the catch, but not a very refined route runner and not a great blocker either, but you want speed and playmaking ability up the middle. That fits James Mitchell as well. So you're starting to get a theme here. The last 2 tight ends the Lions drafted, both not the greatest technicians at the route running ability, but playmakers with the ball in their hands with good speed that can work up the field vertically. The previous tight ends before Laporta and Mitchell were a little bit more traditional. I mean, Brock Wright goes undrafted, I think out of Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head. And this was a guy who was college teammates with Cole Kmet, I believe, and then had 7 catches in college. This was not a receiving threat much at all. This was an effective blocker, but limited as a receiver there. And we've kind of seen that play out in his NFL career, where he's never going to be a number 1 guy, but he can catch it when you throw it to him on checkdowns, but he's not going to be any kind of dynamic playmaker there. A little bit more of a Mercedes Lewis. I mean, at this stage of Mercedes Lewis's career, not what he once was, style of tight end. Sticks on as an undrafted free agent and just a special teams guy who was hard to get rid of. Then before that, the big tight end pick, TJ Hockenson, another Iowa tight end with the 8th overall pick in that draft. To be clear, at this point in 2019, Ben Johnson was an offensive quality control coach and not yet the tight ends coach. So he might not have had a lot of overall influence in the draft selection, but then of course he coaches Hockenson for the next 3 or 4 seasons before they trade TJ Hockenson. So a lot of hands-on work with Hockenson, who of course, coming into that draft, number 1 overall tight end prospect, great athlete, good route runner, strong hands, strong blocker. I know he had kind of been a 1-year wonder where didn't do much his first few seasons at Iowa and then had a huge breakout year and then was a top 10 pick in the draft. But that was kind of the one knock on him, is like, well, he's only done it for 1 year. But, he clearly has been a great NFL player ever since and was a good pick for the Lions there at the top of the draft. But a little bit of a different category of this is just kind of an all-around, easy to scout, easy to like top pick without a ton of flaws there. And then that same year, they drafted Hockenson in the first round. They used their 7th round pick in that same draft on Isaac Nauta, kind of an H-back, undersized, something like 6'3", and he had like a particularly terrible combine performance, around like a 4.9, and was just like in the lowest percentiles for much. Like he looked like a better athlete on tape, but did not test well at the combine. Kind of a move him around, almost hybrid fullback who's a decent receiver with some blocking upside, but as a 7th round pick, not a lot of investment there, not a lot of long-term prognostication there. You take a flyer on a guy to see if he can stick in the league, and it didn't really end up working out there. But I think we're getting a little bit of a profile here of Lions tight ends that they drafted with Ben Johnson being playmakers after the catch, being vertical guys. And all these cases, except for like Brock Wright, blocking hasn't necessarily been priority number 1. Obviously, of course, you always prefer your tight end be a better blocker, but it wasn't as though question marks about blocking for somebody like James Mitchell took them from drafting. Even Laporta had some question marks about blocking. I don't know if they were huge, but some in there. But it hasn't been like you need to meet a certain standard of blocking ability. They kind of feel like, hey, we can refine that and teach it to you. But what we can't teach is speed and yard after catch ability, that playmaking skill set from the tight end position. So you could see where someone like Tyler Warren from Penn State could be attractive to Ben Johnson, but you could also see where if they don't view him as a TJ Hockenson style of all-around great tight end, maybe you do have some questions about his blocking. You do have some questions about some of his other more, refinements as a separator consistently in the NFL. Maybe they don't view him as worth a top 10 pick. And okay, well then if you don't take Warren as a top 10 pick, how else are you going to address tight end in this draft? And I think there's a nice crop here to choose from of guys that maybe are never going to be 1,000-yard Travis Kelce kind of tight ends here, but can still be very, very valuable contributors to your offense. So we'll take a look at the Bears' different styles of tight end options that might be good fits in Ben Johnson's offense next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. Because when you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn has a new feature that helps you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. I'm on LinkedIn. You might be on LinkedIn. If you're not, a lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all a part of the LinkedIn community. So it makes it a great place to find quality candidates. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So if not Tyler Warren from Penn State, where else can Ben Johnson find tight ends that fit what he might want? And this is a deep tight end class that has a lot of different flavors to like, and not everybody fits neatly into one category or other, but I kind of want to isolate this a little bit more of like, do you want more of a TJ Hawkinson, Cole Kmet style of tight end who's a little bit bigger bodied, more of a guy you try and rely on as blocking, who's got receiving ability as well, who's, in the case of Hawkinson, of course, like a great athlete as well. Cole Kmet, also strong athlete, but Hawkinson, next level kind of stuff. Or do you want more of a athletic freak who you can move around and play a lot in the slot on the outside, who's just he's too big for cornerbacks to cover, and he's too fast for linebackers to cover, and you just can't find really the perfect coverage mismatch for that player to take on. You've got options in both styles in this draft. We talked a little bit on yesterday's podcast about Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end, who I'm a big fan of in this draft. I think he's a better blocker than Tyler Warren. I think he's more of a well-rounded threat than what Warren is. Not to say that they're just different styles of prospects. To say that I think Loveland is truly like overall head and shoulders better than Warren, not necessarily, but I think it's sort of what you prefer at that spot, because I think somebody like Warren is a little bit more of a height, weight, speed freak, whereas Loveland is a little bit more all-around reliability kind of freak, and I think there's some differences in what you might prefer there. But assuming those are both first-round guys, that if you're not taking a tight end at 10, then you're not really addressing it again to the second round, and neither of those guys are going to be on the board anyway, so what can you really count on or rely on there? I want to go to some of let's start with the more inline styles of tight end, right? The guys who you can put on the line of scrimmage opposite or next to Cole Kmet and feel like, you've got enough like size and strength there to be real threats as blockers, even if some of these guys are still working on the blocking ability. They're not all going to be elite blockers by any means, but I think there's more of a foundation with these guys and more blocking upside with these guys, and they're maybe a little bit less dynamic of receivers, but still have a lot to like in that area. Let's try to isolate this to just a handful each so it's easy to keep track of. Let's start like in the second round with either of the Bears' 2 second-round picks. Somebody like Mason Taylor from LSU could fit as one of these styles of tight end who absolutely can and did play in the slot sometimes. Like, these are not guys that are slow plotters that you can't move around and be flexible with, but I also think these are kind of guys that I think have more, I'm trying to think of the right word, like reliability and more of the type of skill set that works better in line at the next level. And when I think about Mason Taylor from LSU specifically, of course, everyone knows, or if you don't know at this point, he's the son of Jason Taylor, who evidently just picked a rhyming first name for his son, but nonetheless, son of one of the all-time greats pass rushers in the NFL. Jason Taylor's in the Hall of Fame, isn't he? He's certainly a Dolphins Hall of Famer and a great pass rusher nonetheless. So he's got the bloodlines and the name, etc. But as a football player, he's just really reliable. Like, when I watch Mason Taylor at LSU, I don't know that there's anything he's like great at, but it just feels like he's good at almost everything. He's big. He's not like humongous, but he's big. He's fast, but he's not like super dynamic, but he's got good speed, just not great speed. He can make some plays after the catch, but he's not a dynamic playmaker. He's a pretty good blocker, but he's not going to dominate at the line of scrimmage. Like, he's just reliable. And maybe that limits his ceiling a little bit, but I think he can have a long, consistent, successful NFL career. And that's why he's not a first-round pick kind of guy, but he could be a really, really valuable guy for your team. And I think a good complement then to Cole Kmet, where it's not like, oh my God, we got to get Mason Taylor on the field every play because he's so good. But it's like, no, every time we use him, we know what we're going to get. And that's something that's just super, super reliable, even if maybe he never went above and beyond that. I also look at, like, if you want to go in the third round, or maybe even third to fourth round, you could trade down potentially. But somebody like Terrence Ferguson from Oregon is a little bit more of an athlete than a true inline guy, but I think he's got the skill set to play inline a bit more because he's just smart. There's a savviness to his playmaking ability here that he always is aware of where the line of scrimmage is. He always does a really good job of like finding the space in between the zone. It's a lot of the little things that aren't super measurable in terms of like there's not a number for how well he gets just past the sticks and knows where the down and distance marker is and reads the coverage properly and sinks in the right spot, that right hole in the zone, or, puts the right move on the defender. Like it's the little things that I think really separate him apart. And yet he's also, I think, a willing physical blocker. I don't think he's great at it, but I think the effort and the want to and the drive is there, and it's just about sort of refining the hands and the feet and keeping him on balance a little bit more. And same thing from a route running perspective too. Like he could use some technical refinement there on some of the little things, but I think his intelligence and just sort of natural playmaking ability gives you a lot of upside here, even if there are some limitations overall. You want to go a little later, somebody like Gunnar Helm from Texas. The Bears don't currently have a 4th round pick, but I think I see him in this 4th to 5th round style of range, where he's a little bit like Mason Taylor in that he's not particularly impressive physically. He's not that big. He's not that fast. He's not slow. He's not small, but he's just kind of otherwise, nothing special as an athlete. But like somebody who has good, strong hands, does not drop passes, and can make difficult contested catches. Somebody who you throw the ball near him, he's going to find a way to bring it in. And I think maybe the physical limitations can also limit the ceiling there, but just reliable player as a mid to late round tight end draft pick. Like that sounds like an ideal number 2 tight end who's going to be a good special teams player. A little bit raw as a blocker as well, but somebody who I think has the wherewithal to adapt to that position a bit more. They asked him to do that a decent amount at Texas and motioned him around a lot from an inline tight end spot and to try and give him a head start on some of the blocking. But I think there's some ways you can maximize that with him potentially in Chicago. And then one other guy who's more of an average athlete, but just like physicality and toughness is Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame, another Notre Dame tight end in the mix. A guy who's going to be 5th, maybe even 6th round type of range here. Physicality, tough, difficult catches, and strength. Like this is a guy who is hard to push off of his route, push away from the ball. Maybe his lack of athletic ability isn't going to limit like the true playmaking and separation there. And he's not a guy who had a lot of downfield catches, was mostly kind of used underneath in that Notre Dame offense. Didn't get a lot of targets in the red zone either, which is surprising given how physical he is and how well he can sort of shield defenders away from his body. So I think there is some upside there to be tapped into as a red zone threat there, but you just didn't see this be a guy who made a lot of big plays or downfield catches or plays after the catch here. But if you just want somebody a little bit more solid and reliable, like somebody like Mitchell Evans or Gunnar Helm or even Terrence Ferguson in that regard, I think could be more in that style of role, right? It's not exactly what they had in Sam Laporta. It's not exactly what they went after in Mitchell, but it's more of that what Brock Wright has become for them in the NFL as a reliable enough pass catcher with some upside as a blocker and an inline player in there. The Bears can find a few of those different guys later in this draft, and it doesn't have to be Tyler Warren in the first round, doesn't have to be even Mason Taylor in the second round to still find players like that. If they would rather go big time athlete, pass catching, dynamic weaponeer who might not have as much of the blocking upside there, there's plenty of those in this draft after the first round. Doesn't have to be Tyler Warren for that group either. So we'll take a look at some other guys who might be a little bit more like oversized wide receivers, but hey, Ben Johnson can figure out how to use one of those next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. We're only about a week away from the NFL draft, and you can get all of your NFL draft bets in with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is a great time to get started on FanDuel, because when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. So you can bet on who's going to be any of the top 5 picks in the draft. You can bet on what position the Chicago Bears are going to draft with their first pick. You can bet on which team is going to draft Ashton Genty, and so much more. You can bet ahead on the upcoming NFL season. You can bet on the NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball season, the hockey playoffs right around the corner, soccer, tennis, boxing, you name it. They've got it all on FanDuel in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. If Ben Johnson isn't as concerned about how well his next tight end can line up in line and take on a defensive end in the running game and just says, give me the playmaker downfield that can be a weapon for Caleb and open up my offense, he's got options beyond the first round. Tyler Warren could absolutely be that. But if Tyler Warren goes before the Bears pick or the Bears trade down or whatever it might be, don't worry. All hope is not lost. You can instantly look to, say, the second round, where you've got a wet pass catcher like Elijah Arroyo from Miami. When you're going to talk about somebody who's fast and fluid, who moves so much more cleanly than you would expect of a player of his size. This is a vertical threat who can separate and has strong hands. This is the playmaker. This type of player, to me, fits a similar type of conversation as somebody like Sam Laporta a couple of years ago, where he's a little bit raw as a route runner and as a blocker, wasn't used a ton in that same role, but you can't teach the speed and fluidity that he has. And the ability to make tough catches that doesn't drop the ball much at all. Like, you can work on the blocking, you can work on the routes, but Arroyo to me is your next best pass catching option after the first round if you can't get Loveland or Warren. I still think Loveland is a good fit for Ben Johnson as well and can do a little bit of both of these types of roles, just maybe not at the 10th overall pick, but if you trade down, I think Loveland could be in that conversation. A lot of people really like Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. To me, he's more of a third-round option, whereas Arroyo you'd take in the second. Because Fannin Jr. is interesting because, of course, led all of college football in receiving for a tight end, set a bunch of crazy records, had a crazy amount of yards and catches and touchdowns. And this is a guy who's got straight line speed that's elite for the tight end position. He gets off the line of scrimmage, shot out of a cannon. He tracks the ball in the air really, really well on those deep bombs. He can just find it and get under it. And even not on the deep bombs, he can make yards after the catch. He is a playmaking player at the tight end position. But he is so surprisingly stiff as an athlete. I mean, you could see it even just watching him practice the Senior Bowl. Like the change of directions of the route running, right? It is clunky and it is awkward, and it's just the opposite of the kind of fluidity that someone like Arroyo has next to him. He's also a little bit on the smaller side. He's like 235-ish pounds, 6'3", so a little bit more of an oversized wide receiver. Not a great blocker much at all, because he was just the number one pass-catching option in their offense. They're not going to ask him to block all that much over there at Bowling Green because he was dominating every time he touched the ball. You can see where it could be intriguing to get that kind of playmaker and say, hey, we'll figure out the rest earlier. He just catches passes and has great vertical speed. Like, we'll absolutely take that and make it work. But if Ben Johnson's going to ask a tight end to have more of a well-rounded skill set, I'm not sure that somebody like Harold Fannin is quite as ideal of a fit, but maybe Ben Johnson could have a specific role in mind that he kind of craft for a player like this with that kind of skill set. I think Oronde Gadsden, the second from Syracuse, is in a similar mold just a couple rounds later in the draft as a big, long, but kind of lightweight tight end, oversized wide receiver type with huge catch radius, great hands, can make contested catches. You throw it near him, he's going to find a way to make that catch. And he's a pretty good athlete, but we haven't really seen Gadsden make a lot of plays after the catch. Also not that great of a route runner. He's just kind of a big body with good hands who can run a little bit, but not that great of a blocker and not that great of a playmaker. And I'm not sure, you could sell yourself on Fannin being the guy that Ben Johnson could craft a role for, but Gadsden, it's like, well, we need you to be more of a playmaker after the catch. Like, if you're not going to be a great route runner, if you're not going to be, a valuable blocker, like, at least we need you to be more shifty and make more guys miss. And I'm not sure that Gadsden quite has that either. More of like a possession receiver, red zone type guy, and that's why he's more of like a 5th or a 6th round potential option there. Whereas someone like Jake Briningstool from Clemson's, the last guy we'll throw in here quick, again, late round, 5th, 6th, maybe even 7th round potential player here, who doesn't have a ton of after the catch playmaking and isn't necessarily special as an athlete, but I think of these other receiving guys who play the slot quite a bit, he might be the best blocker of this group. And to me, he's got good speed, who can kind of start and stop. Again, not a special athlete, but in terms of his ability to accelerate and decelerate, and the route running potential is absolutely there. So when you add somebody who you think has some of the route running skills plus good hands and a catch radius with some decent blocking, you could talk yourself into him being a late round option here that emerges as a number 2, number 3 tight end right away, despite being a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick type of player. The Bears don't have a 6th round pick this year, so the 5th round might be a little early for him, but he might not last to the 7th. So the sweet spot here for Chicago becomes a little bit more difficult, but I think Brenningstool can be a little bit of that Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, just right style of more of a receiving type, but who can go in line a little bit as well. Some of these guys don't fit neatly into these categories, and I would hate to oversimplify exactly what they're going to be able to do at the NFL level here, but I think it kind of gives you a sense of like, hey, there's different options here for the Bears in different rounds of the draft that you feel like can fulfill that role and provide the necessary needed depth the Bears are lacking at the tight end position. And it absolutely does not just have to be somebody like Tyler Warren from Penn State or even Colston Loveland from Michigan there. We'll see how strongly the Bears feel about the top of this tight end class. Ben Johnson has raved about Tyler Warren when he was asked specifically about Tyler Warren. I, again, contend that Colston Loveland is more like Sam Laporta than Tyler Warren is like Sam Laporta, and I could see Ben Johnson actually preferring a player like Colston Loveland. Now, is that with the 10th overall pick? Probably not, but you trade down to 12 with the Cowboys or 13 with the Dolphins or 14 with the Colts, if I've got those teams right, and maybe Loveland is an easier pick there. Maybe he's the best player available at one of those spots instead. All of a sudden, that could open up the draft board. That's what we talked about on yesterday's podcast. So make sure you go back and take a listen to that if you haven't already. We talked about the running backs after, why it's kind of genty or bust in the first round, but the tight ends, a little bit of a different conversation. We went through all of that on yesterday's podcast. That's why you got to subscribe to Locked On Bears on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, you can always get more draft talk over at the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. You can find that on YouTube or wherever you listen to Locked On Bears for even more draft analysis, news, notes, scouting reports, rumors, and mock drafts leading up to the big thing. Just about a week away from draft day, we'll have our Locked On Podcast Network mock draft dropping here soon in the Locked On Bears podcast feed as well. So be on the lookout for that. Maybe a little bit of a controversial pick from me with the Bears at the 10th overall spot, but we'll talk through it on the podcast as well. And in the meantime, I hope that you make Locked On Bears your first listen again tomorrow and come on back for another opportunity to bear down.